Hello and welcome, I'm Lucian, and today I'm going to be talking about a track of mine called Closer featuring Lonelyspeck. Lonelyspeck is one of the best artists around, so I'm very, very chuffed to have Sione on this one. This track was pretty heavily inspired by Children by Robert Miles, a timeless classic of a tune. With this instrumental, I was really aiming to capture a sense of that like 90s nostalgic trance house dance vibe mixed with production elements that are, you know, a lot more contemporary that you'd hear nowadays that wouldn't have been a thing back then. The first sound that I started with was the piano, which is an altered preset of a piano patch from the Roland VERSELAB, and it goes a bit like this. From there, I just went about kind of deep frying the piano to give it a bit more of a vintage feel. For people who use Ableton, or even for people who don't use Ableton, you probably know of the multi-band preset OTT, which I think I got it from like a Reed Stefan video where it can really help to like split it out into different bands. Particularly boosting the high and mid highs gives it this nice sort of telephony effect, and it ended up sounding like this. After the pianos, I went about making some pads. The pads consist of quite a few layers. Some of them are synths like CS80 replicas, and also like granular vocal pads, which is taking just like a tiny snippet of like a vocal sample and then stretching it out into chords. It goes a bit like this. So all the production up until this point, I reckon you could probably hear it in a 90s dance track, but I wanted to switch up the production with sounds that you'd hear more nowadays. That's most notably in the drums and the bass. The bass is kind of just like a really distorted respace. It goes like this. And the drums almost have a bit of an industrial vibe to them, and they just consist of way too many layers to get into. I actually came back to this track quite a few times, and instead of making new drum beats each time when I wasn't happy with it, I just kept laying on more and more and more and more until we got to where we are now. So isolated, they sound like this. So besides for these elements, not many other new sounds are introduced throughout the track. It's more that things just come in and out at different times, and that's sort of how I built the structure. The only other thing that's really worth mentioning is all the effects on Sione's vocals. Now obviously the song sounds pretty dreamy, and I think that all the different reverbs and delays on Sione's vocals contribute a really large portion to that. As you can see, I've got a pretty... not the biggest, but not the smallest chain on Sione's vocals with some saturation, a couple of different delays, and a couple different reverbs, and some, you know, telephony, deep fried effects. So all together they sound a bit like this.
Closer, I'm getting closer,
Lastly, I decided to do the classic reverse reverb into Sierene's vocals just to really commit to this dreamy sound. I've done this basically in every track for the past like 4 years, whether that's been for someone else or for myself. And you just achieve this by taking the full vocal track, reversing it, putting reverb on it that signal's completely wet, flattening that, then reversing the flattened reverb so it swells into the vocal. From there you'll probably, depending on taste, sidechain the reversed version of the vocal to the actual vocal take so they don't clash with one another. And that sounds like this.
I'm getting closer now, my inner circle.
But yeah, that's it. Hope you enjoyed this. Holding back a burp. Goodbye.